Imagine this: every heartbreak you endured, every door that closed, every silence that once felt unbearable. What if none of them were punishment? What if they were proof that the system has already seen who you truly are and decided you're ready? You see, most people believe life rewards effort. But what if the universe doesn't measure effort, it measures frequency? What if intelligence itself, call it the field, the divine consciousness, doesn't care about how hard you try, but how coherent you've become? Because coherence, this invisible alignment between your mind, heart, and action, is what decides what reality mirrors back to you. And every challenge you faced wasn't random. It was a calibration, a test, not of your strength, but of your purity. Not of what you can control, but of what you can surrender to without breaking. In this episode, you'll discover the quiet mechanics of transformation, why chaos comes before clarity, why loss precedes alignment, and why those who walk alone for a season are often being trained for leadership in silence. We'll explore 5 levels of coherence, the unseen stages that every awakened soul passes through. And at the very end, I'll reveal what I call the final exam, the moment when the field tests whether you can hold power without distortion. So if you've ever wondered why life feels like a cycle of breakdowns before breakthroughs, stay with me. You might realize that what you thought was falling apart was actually falling into place. We live in an age that glorifies speed. Everywhere you look, people are rushing, chasing goals, hustling for validation, stacking achievements like armor against their own uncertainty. We scroll, we compare, we measure progress by metrics that have nothing to do with peace. But the truth is, not all movement is progress. Sometimes the faster you run, the further you drift from yourself. And the reason is simple. Motion without coherence is just noise. Coherence, that rare inner alignment between what you think, what you feel, and what you do, is what transforms effort into impact. It's the difference between shouting into the void and being heard by the universe, between striving endlessly and watching things begin to unfold with quiet precision. The Stoics understood this long before we had the language of energy or frequency. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." What he meant was, the quality of your inner tone eventually paints the entire canvas of your life. If your thoughts are turbulent, the world around you mirrors confusion. If your thoughts are steady, life starts to stabilize itself around your calm. Reality becomes a reflection of your internal order, your coherence. That's what this message means when it says, if this finds you, you've already crossed the final threshold. It isn't some mystical code, nor a spiritual riddle. It's a recognition. It's life itself acknowledging that you've reached the point where you no longer seek truth as something external, because you've begun to embody it. The field doesn't need to test you anymore. It begins to trust you. That trust changes everything. You stop asking, when will things work out for me, and start realizing they already are. Just not in the way your ego once demanded. You stop chasing answers, because the silence starts answering back. You stop trying to prove your worth, because peace becomes proof enough. In this journey, we'll explore how the transformation unfolds through 5 distinct layers, the 5 patterns of coherence. Each one is a phase you've likely lived without naming it, from the moment your reality starts reflecting your inner balance, to the quiet downloads of intuition that seem to come from nowhere, to the eerie precision of timing, where relationships appear or dissolve exactly when they should. And when we reach the final pattern, integration and embodiment, you'll see that coherence isn't something you practice anymore. It becomes who you are, a silent authority, a calm presence, a life that doesn't need to shout to be heard. So before we begin, take a breath. Not to prepare, but to remember, you've already crossed the threshold. Now, we're just learning how to walk differently on the other side. Every person has a phase in life where they work tirelessly, pushing, striving, doing everything right. Yet nothing moves. You meditate, you visualize, you hustle. But the door stays shut. And in that silence, frustration creeps in. You start believing you're being punished, or worse, ignored. But what if that silence isn't rejection? What if it's measurement? The universe doesn't respond to what you say, or even what you want. It responds to who you are, to the tone of your being when no one is watching. It measures coherence, not effort. Because a chaotic mind can't produce a coherent outcome. Coherent manifestation begins when you understand this. Reality is not a wish-granting machine. It's a mirror. It reflects your internal structure, your beliefs, your emotional rhythm, your hidden tone of truth. And just like a distorted mirror bends the image you send into it, a distorted state bends the results you receive. Most people try to speak their dreams into existence. But manifestation doesn't come from speaking louder. It comes from being clearer. The moment your emotions, thoughts, and intentions stop arguing with each other, the field finally recognizes a single signal and responds instantly. That's why the ancients practiced stillness before action. Because coherence is not created in motion. It's revealed in silence. You align internally first, then the external world follows. This is the first sign you've begun crossing the threshold. When your reality slows down long enough to match the rhythm of your truth. Picture this. A man wakes up every morning, reads motivational quotes, listens to success podcasts, repeats affirmations like a ritual. He does everything the world tells him will bring change. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispers, nothing's working. Not because he's doing something wrong, but because he's doing everything out of fear. He wants money because he's afraid of scarcity. He wants love because he's afraid of loneliness. He wants peace because he's afraid of losing control. And fear, no matter how well disguised, always distorts coherence.uc. The field doesn't listen to words. It listens to vibration. It detects the subtle difference between I want this and I am ready for this, between I need to prove and I already embody. That difference, invisible to the conscious mind, changes everything. Reality doesn't punish him. It simply mirrors his tension. So, he attracts more situations that make him prove, more lessons that expose his fears. It's not personal, it's calibration. The universe is adjusting the dials, waiting for him to stabilize his internal signal. True manifestation begins the moment he stops performing and starts aligning. When his desires stop coming from lack and start flowing from wholeness. That's when everything he was chasing begins to find him. Not because he demanded it, but because he became compatible with it. The mirror only clears when you stop breathing fog onto it. And that's the paradox. The less you chase, the faster it drives. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." He wasn't dismissing pain. He was describing distortion. Because pain, when filtered through fear, becomes torment. But pain, when filtered through clarity, becomes information. That's the essence of coherent manifestation, turning pain into data instead of drama. Every disappointment, every delay, every closed door is feedback from the field, a form of calibration. It's not saying, "You're not worthy." It's asking, "Can you hold your peace even when the reflection doesn't match your desire?" Most people fail here. They confuse waiting with punishment, when in truth, waiting is refinement. The Stoics knew that no external event holds power over us. Only our interpretation of it does. They trained themselves to meet chaos with calm, not because they were detached, but because they understood that coherence is tested in turbulence, not in peace. If you can remain steady when your plans collapse. The field records that stability is proof of readiness. It's like standing still in a storm while others run for cover. Not because you're fearless, but because you trust that the storm is part of your initiation. Pain becomes sacred when you stop dramatizing it. It becomes a teacher when you stop asking why me, and start asking what is this shaping in me. That question alone shifts your frequency. It pulls you from resistance to resonance, and in that subtle shift, reality begins to realign. Coherence is not a theory you memorize. It's a muscle you train, and like every muscle, it grows stronger under resistance. That's why the moments that trigger you the most are not interruptions. They are invitations. When someone disrespects you, when a project collapses, when life feels out of rhythm, that's your training ground. The Stoics practiced this daily. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of misfortune. They imagined loss and hardship not to invite negativity, but to train their emotional circuitry, so that when adversity arrived, their nervous system already knew what peace felt like. In modern language, this practice could be called observation pause before reacting. You stop, even for 3 seconds. You let the body feel the surge, the heat, the pulse. You don't suppress it. You observe it. And in that tiny pocket of awareness, something magical happens. You reclaim coherence. It's not about pretending you're calm. It's about choosing calm while your emotions are still loud. That act, the deliberate pause, sends a signal to the field saying, I can hold energy without distortion, and each time you do it, the field responds with more trust, more alignment, more synchronicity, stillness. Then is not the absence of movement, it's the presence of mastery. And that's how coherence becomes strength, not because you suppress chaos, but because you stop being swallowed by it. The first sign that you're entering coherence is subtle, almost imperceptible. You'll notice that the world around you starts to slow down, not because life has become easier, but because your inner tempo has become steadier. The noise no longer pulls you in. It simply moves past you like waves brushing against a rock. That's when you begin to see what the Stoics meant by freedom. Not freedom from chaos, but freedom within it. When nothing external can dictate your internal state anymore, you have crossed the invisible threshold. You've stopped being a reactor of reality and started becoming its conductor. From that place, manifestation stops being an act of control and becomes a state of communion. You no longer try to attract, you resonate. You no longer force outcomes. You align with timing. Everything you need begins to appear naturally, because you are finally speaking the same language as the field. Coherence. This is the point where many people feel a deep calm for the first time and mistake it for stagnation. But it's not stagnation, it's synchronization. Life pauses to catch up with the frequency you've built. The mirror needs a moment to clear before it reflects your new image. So if you find yourself in that quiet space, don't rush out of it. You're not being delayed, you're being tuned. Because what comes next requires precision, not pressure. And that brings us to the next phase, information field access, where coherence turns into clarity, and clarity begins to speak to you. There comes a moment in every seeker's path when thinking too much becomes a barrier instead of a bridge. You read the books, you follow the mentors, you analyze every choice, every sign, and somehow, the more you try to understand, the less you actually know. It's as if reality starts speaking in a language you can't translate with logic anymore. That's when something shifts. You begin to sense that truth isn't something you chase. It's something you tune into. It doesn't arrive through intensity, but through intimacy, the quiet synchronization between your awareness and the intelligence of the field. This is information field access, the second pattern of coherence. It's when knowledge stops being effort and starts becoming recognition. You no longer collect information. You remember it. The field, this vast ocean of unseen data, begins to trust you with pieces of it, because your frequency has stabilized enough not to distort what you receive. That's why intelligence doesn't reward effort. It measures frequency. If your mind is scattered, it can't process the signal clearly. But when your heart and thoughts move in rhythm, when your inner noise quiets down, you start perceiving the architecture behind events. The Stoics call this living in accordance with nature. To them, nature wasn't forests or rivers. It was the universal order, the logos that connects everything. To live in harmony with it meant aligning perception with truth, not bending truth to fit desire. And when you finally touch that alignment, insights don't come through struggle. They arrive like a memory you had forgotten you owned. Most people block access to this field without realizing it. They fill every quiet moment with noise, podcasts, music, notifications, the endless scroll of other people's opinions. They confuse stimulation with connection and information with wisdom. But the more data they consume, the weaker their signal becomes. Think of your consciousness like a radio. When you constantly switch frequencies, you never give the antenna time to stabilize. You pick up fragments of everything. But the message from the field, the one meant for you, gets drowned out. Coherence, then, is not about effort. It's about signal clarity. It's about creating enough stillness for a truth to find its way in. Because the field does not shout, it whispers. And if your life is too loud, you won't hear the whisper that was guiding you all along. This is why the ancient philosophers, mystics, and Stoics alike valued silence. They understood that solitude wasn't isolation, it was reception. Marcus Aurelius meditated not to escape the world, but to tune into its underlying intelligence. In that silence, he wrote lines that still echo centuries later, words not born from overthinking, but from listening. In the modern world, the pause has become rare. We scroll instead of reflect. We react instead of respond. Yet the intelligence of the field hasn't changed. It still waits patiently for coherence. The question is no longer, how do I learn more? It's how quiet can I become so truth can reach me? Once you begin to quiet the noise, something extraordinary starts to happen. Answers begin arriving before the question is even fully formed. You think of someone and they call. You sense a decision and suddenly the right path appears. It's as if the universe has been waiting for you to stop shouting so it could finally speak. This is what accessing the field truly feels like. It's not a lightning bolt or a supernatural voice. It's subtle. It comes through intuition, through timing, through the gentle unfolding of synchronicity. It feels like remembering something ancient that you somehow already knew. The Stoics would have called this living in agreement with reason, the universal order of things, logos. They believed that wisdom doesn't belong to any individual. It flows through everyone who becomes still enough to listen. Epictetus said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Because silence often looks like ignorance to those who can't stand stillness. But the reward for that silence is immense. Your intuition sharpens. You stop second-guessing yourself, because your decisions no longer come from fear, but from resonance. You begin to know instead of think. This is not mystical. It's coherence in motion. The brain and the heart begin to operate in sync, creating a biological harmony that opens perception itself. It's as if your internal radio finally locks onto the frequency of truth, and every signal you once missed becomes crystal clear. So how do you strengthen this connection with the field in everyday life? It doesn't require rituals, crystals, or special words. It begins with reclaiming silence. Small, deliberate pockets of quiet built into an otherwise noisy day. The first 10 minutes after you wake up are sacred. Most people reach for their phones, letting hundreds of signals flood their nervous system before their consciousness has even settled. But if you start your morning in silence, no screens, no stimulation, you allow your internal signal to stabilize before the world begins to pull at it. That single act changes the tone of your entire day. During the day, try pausing before reacting. You'll notice that your first impulse usually comes from emotion, but your real answer arrives a second later, through intuition. That's the field adjusting you in real time, sending micro-guidance you can only catch if you're not rushing to respond. The Stoics practiced this kind of awareness constantly. They called it prosauge, attention. It meant being fully present in each moment, observing thought before it turns into speech, feeling before it turns into reaction. That simple discipline turned ordinary actions into acts of wisdom. And the more you practice this still awareness, the more precise the field's feedback becomes. You start noticing patterns, connections, synchronicities that used to look random. Life stops feeling like chaos and starts behaving like a conversation, one in which silence speaks louder than words. The moment you begin accessing the field, life starts communicating differently. Coincidences turn into confirmations. What once felt like random events now carry meaning, as if a hidden pattern is weaving through every detail. You'll notice you're no longer figuring things out. You're remembering them. Conversations begin to arrive at the right time. Books fall off the shelf with exactly the message you needed. You meet someone by chance who speaks the sentence that resolves a question you've wrestled with for months. These are not accidents, they're alignments. They are signs that your frequency and the field's rhythm have begun to match. But the true confirmation isn't external synchronicity, it's internal peace. You feel less urgency, less need to control outcomes. Your mind becomes a clear surface where insight can land without distortion. That clarity doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. The Stoics call this eupatheia, the good emotions that rise when one's reason and nature are in harmony. It's a serenity that isn't dependent on circumstances, because you've learned to listen to the deeper current guiding them, and from this calm state, a new ability begins to unfold, the capacity to navigate probabilities. You no longer choose from fear or impulse. You sense which direction holds the highest coherence. Decisions that once felt complex now feel obvious. This is the threshold between knowing and moving, the bridge between clarity and action. And in the next stage, you'll discover how the coherent mind doesn't just receive information. It steers reality itself. Every decision you make carries a frequency, and that frequency determines which version of reality you step into. It sounds poetic, but it's practical. The energy behind your choices shapes the outcomes you meet. When you decide out of fear, you open doors that match that vibration, doors that lead to more fear, more conflict, more resistance. But when you decide from calm awareness, life rearranges itself to support that clarity. The same action, quitting a job, ending a relationship, starting a project, can lead to vastly different results depending on the state of being that powdered. That's what Stoics understood as the art of rational will, not cold logic, but clarity free from turbulence. They practiced separating impulse from intention, emotion from essence, until every choice came from alignment, not reaction. In the modern world, this art has been replaced by overthinking. We call it analysis, but most of the time, it's just fear disguised as reason. We plan not to succeed, but to avoid failing. And so our actions carry the subtle residue of panic. Probability navigation begins when you realize that reality isn't linear. It's responsive. It reacts to coherence like a compass needle to a magnetic field. When your internal compass is still, you sense direction instantly. You start to feel what's true, not as emotion, but as resonance, a subtle click in your awareness that says, this way. This is not magic. It's precision, the natural intelligence of a mind that has stopped fighting itself long enough to hear the signal beneath the noise. Imagine standing at a crossroads. To your left, a path that feels safe, predictable, socially approved, full of logic. To your right, a path that feels uncertain, but strangely peaceful. Something in your body relaxes when you picture it. even if your mind can't explain why. That soft pull toward peace is not random. It's the field showing you a line of probability that matches your current coherence. Your irrational mind might panic. It's risky. What if I fail? But the body always knows the truth before the brain can articulate it. This is how the field communicates once you're coherent enough to sense it. It doesn't send visions or signs. It adjusts feeling. Every reality branch carries a unique emotional texture. When you pause and listen deeply, you can sense which path feels lighter, more stable, more aligned. That's your frequency recognizing its match. Seneca hinted at this when he wrote, "Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling." In other words, when you align willingly, life flows. When you resist, life still leads you there, but through friction. The pain we call bad luck is often just the resistance of walking against our own resonance. So the art of probability navigation is not about predicting the future. It's about listening to the present. It's learning to read the emotional signature of each possibility before you choose. And when you start moving from that awareness, your life begins to feel less like chance and more like choreography, a dance between you and the intelligence that has been guiding you all along. The hardest part of navigating probabilities isn't sensing the right path, it's trusting it. Because the moment intuition speaks, the mind immediately interrupts. It demands guarantees, proof, and timelines. It says, "Show me that this will work, and I'll follow." But the field doesn't negotiate. It invites. Trust is the currency of coherence. And the moment you demand certainty before moving, you've already fallen out of alignment. You've shifted from resonance to resistance. The Stoics called this the tyranny of attachment, the desperate need for a control that blinds you to what's already unfolding naturally. They trained themselves to replace control with clarity. Epictetus said, "Some things are up to us, and some are not. To live wisely is to know the difference, to act on what's within your reach, and surrender the rest to order. In probability navigation, surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means trusting that coherence has intelligence of its own, that the same force aligning galaxies can also align your next step. When you act from that trust, small coincidences begin confirming your choice. Doors open without forcing. People arrive without effort. It feels less like making things happen and more like being moved by something accurate and benevolent. This is where logic and faith meet. Not blind faith, but empirical trust built on repetition. Each time you let go and the outcome aligns perfectly, you teach your nervous system that surrender is safe. And when the body stops fearing uncertainty, guidance becomes continuous. When you finally trust the current instead of fighting it, something remarkable happens. You enter flow. In this state, time bends. Actions unfold with precision. Words align effortlessly, and outcomes seem to coordinate themselves without your conscious control. It's not luck, it's coherence expressing itself through motion. The Stoics didn't use the word flow, but they lived it. Marcus Aurelius called it acting in accordance with nature. To him, virtue wasn't moral performance. It was alignment with the natural rhythm of the universe. When you stop interfering with that rhythm, your actions gain an elegance that no amount of strategy can produce. Think of an athlete at their peak, the musician mid-performance, the surgeon in deep focus, the writer lost in creation. They're not thinking their next move. They're responding to an invisible sequence that feels pre-written. That's what it means to navigate probabilities. You're no longer guessing. You're moving in sync with a larger pattern. This is why control is an illusion. The more you try to grip life, the more it slips through your fingers. But when you loosen that grip, precision returns. Because guidance was never missing. It was simply drowned by noise. Flow is not about ease. It's about harmony. It doesn't erase difficulty. It orchestrates it. Every challenge, every delay, becomes part of the composition. And when you can move through both chaos and calm with the same steady rhythm, you realize you were never steering the current. You were the current all along. You'll know you're navigating probabilities correctly when life starts feeling lighter. Not because it's easier, but because resistance fades. You stop feeling like you're pushing against reality. Instead, you begin moving with it, carried by an invisible alignment that seems to know where you're supposed to go. Decisions that used to drain you now feel simple. You stop asking, "What if this goes wrong?" and start sensing, "This just feels right." That feeling, subtle, calm, almost anticlimactic, is coherence guiding you quietly through infinite choices. It's not always glamorous. Sometimes it means walking away when you'd rather stay. Sometimes it means pausing when the world screams for urgency. But every time you honor that intuitive nudge, the field rewards you with precision. Seneca described this as amor fati, the love of fate. Not passive acceptance, but active cooperation with what is. He understood that peace isn't found by controlling outcomes. It's found by aligning with them. When you stop fearing what could go wrong, you begin aligning with what's already right. In this state, coincidences evolve into choreography. You begin to meet the right people at the right time for the right reasons. Reality itself starts moving you forward as if it's grateful that you finally stopped resisting its rhythm. That's where our next evolution begins, Coherent Relationship Orchestration. Because the field doesn't just rearrange your path, it rearranges your connections. When your frequency changes, the people and situations around you start shifting too. Some will fade, others will appear, all with perfect timing. When your internal frequency shifts, relationships begin to reorganize themselves. Not through drama or confrontation, but through quiet recalibration. People you once felt deeply connected to start drifting away, while others you barely noticed begin to appear in your orbit. It's not rejection, it's resonance. This is Coherent Relationship Orchestration, the fourth stage of alignment. It's the process where the field rearranges your human connections to match the frequency you now hold. The people, opportunities, and environments that no longer vibrate with your inner tone simply fade out, sometimes abruptly, sometimes gently. And at first, this can feel like loss. You might wonder, why are people leaving? You might feel guilt for outgrowing circles that once defined you. But coherence cannot coexist with distortion. When you raise your inner frequency, anything not aligned begins to fall away. Not out of cruelty, but out of natural law. Just like a radio station loses signal when you tune to a new channel, relationships fade when they no longer share the same wavelength. The Stoics understood this detachment, but they called it by another name: indifference to externals. It wasn't apathy, it was awareness that clinging to what's fading is resistance to what's next. To hold peace through change requires courage. Because growth always comes with silence. The silence left behind when old echoes stop returning your call. That silence isn't empty. It's space being cleared for the next harmony to enter. As your frequency changes, life begins sorting itself through resonance, quietly, efficiently, without asking for your permission. The field is mathematical in that way. It doesn't decide who's good or bad. It simply organizes reality according to vibration. You might notice that certain conversations no longer nourish you. Topics that once felt stimulating now drain your energy. You might find yourself craving solitude even when surrounded by people. And you start to sense, almost intuitively, who expands your peace and who compresses it. This is the law of resonance in action. Like frequencies attract, dissonant ones repel. It's not about superiority or moral judgment. It's about compatibility of energy. Just like two instruments either harmonize or clash depending on their tuning. But here's the difficult part. Your ego won't understand it at first. It will label the fading connections as rejection. It will try to hold on to what's familiar, even when it no longer fits. It will say, "They've changed," or "You've changed," without realizing that change was the whole point. Seneca once wrote, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you, not because others are lesser, but because energy is contagious." When you share time with people of coherence, your own signal strengthens. When you remain in chaos too long, your inner order begins to distort. So when people begin to fade, bless them. It's not failure, it's completion. Some chapters end not with conflict, but with quiet precision. When both souls have learned what they came together to learn, after the field reorganizes your connections, there's a phase that almost everyone misunderstands: the void. It's the quiet space that opens when the old has left but the new hasn't yet arrived. You wake up and realize the people who once filled your days are gone. The conversations have stopped, and the familiar rhythm has disappeared. It feels like being suspended between worlds, too far from who you were, not yet close to who you're becoming. This is where many turn back. They mistake silence for emptiness, solitude for punishment. But the void is not punishment, it's integration. It's where your new frequency stabilizes before building the next pattern. The Stoics spent their lives preparing for the space. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about standing alone. The wise man is like a rock the waves keep crushing against. He didn't glorify isolation. He accepted it as a natural interval of growth, just as a seed must rest in darkness before sprouting. Coherence requires solitude before expansion. In the void, your nervous system detoxes from old energy. You might feel boredom, restlessness, even grief. That's normal. It's not the absence of connection, it's the purification of it. You're learning to belong to yourself before belonging to others again. When you can hold peace inside that emptiness, when you can breathe through the ache without reaching for distraction, the field recognizes your readiness. It starts building the next network around you, quietly, invisibly. And when the timing is right, new people appear, not as replacements, but as reflections of who you've become. Then, almost imperceptibly, new connections begin to form. You meet someone unexpectedly, and the conversation flows as if it's been waiting years to happen. Opportunities rise in perfect timing, often through people you'd never have noticed before. It feels less like networking and more like recognition, two frequencies recognizing each other across the field. These are not coincidences, they are orchestrations. The field ranges people with mathematical precision once your coherence is stable. Every connection that enters your life now carries purpose, some to teach, some to mirror, some to walk beside you for a time, but none arrive by chance. You'll notice that communication with these new people feels lighter. There's less need to explain, defend, or prove. They understand you not because they agree with you, but because they resonate with you. The interaction itself feels healing, effortless, honest, alive. Seneca once advised, when you choose a friend, choose someone you wish to become. That's coherence in human form. The people you attract now don't fill your emptiness. They expand your capacity. They don't complete you. They collaborate with your evolution. And yet, even these harmonious bonds are not meant to be permanent in the old sense. Coherence is dynamic. As your frequency continues to refine, relationships evolve too. Some deepen, some complete. All contribute to your growth. When you begin to see relationships not as possessions, but as exchanges of resonance, every meeting becomes sacred. You stop asking how long will this last, and start asking what truth are we here to reflect to each other. But every orchestration, no matter how harmonious, will eventually face what I call the final test. It arrives quietly, often disguised as a misunderstanding, a sudden distance, or an unexpected betrayal. Not to punish you, but to measure your purity, to see whether your coherence can hold even when the reflection turns against you. This is where the field tests your authority. Can you remain centered when someone misreads your silence? Can you choose compassion when your ego wants to defend itself? Can you release what you love without bitterness when it's no longer aligned? Marcus Aurelius faced this test daily as an emperor surrounded by betrayal and politics. Yet he wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." That is coherence under pressure, responding from order instead of reaction. It's not weakness, it's power purified of distortion. In this stage, you'll realize that some relationships are not meant to last, but to reveal. They appear as mirrors to expose the final residue of control, fear, or pride still hiding within you. And when you can see those fragments without judgment, when you can bless what hurt you, the field records mastery. You no longer need the lesson repeated, because you've passed it. The storm loses its purpose once you learn to walk through rain without losing your fire. This is the moment when you graduate from reacting to orchestrating. You stop playing notes and begin conducting the entire symphony of your interactions, not with words, but with presence. When you pass that final test, something inside you softens. The need to prove, to correct, to be understood, it dissolves. You no longer seek resolution from others, because peace has already taken root within you. And from that stillness, relationships begin to reorganize once again. Not through control, but through vibration. People start showing up differently. Those who once triggered you now evoke compassion instead of anger. Those who once drained you fade without drama. And those who truly resonate with your frequency remain. Not out of obligation, but by natural law. It's no longer about who stays in your life, but about what your life starts to sound like. You realize every interaction has always been part of a larger orchestration, teaching you patience, humility, and balance. Even pain had rhythm. Even endings had melody. The field wasn't punishing you. It was tuning you, note by note, until your presence could sustain harmony without effort. This is what Seneca meant when he said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity." He knew that harmony is not born in comfort. It's sculpted through contrast. And once that lesson settles in your bones, you no longer resist change. You conduct it. That's the quiet power of coherence. It doesn't dominate, it orchestrates. It doesn't chase connection. It magnetizes it. And from this calm command, a new phase begins. One where wisdom is no longer something you study or speak about. It becomes who you are. That's the essence of integration and embodiment, the final stage of coherence, where truth stops being knowledge and becomes movement. There comes a moment in every seeker's path when practice dissolves into presence. You no longer think about applying wisdom, because wisdom has quietly become your default setting. The teachings, the quotes, the rituals, all the frameworks you once leaned on, start fading into something simpler, a way of being. This is integration and embodiment, the fifth and final stage of coherence. It's where you stop trying to live in alignment and simply exist there. You are no longer chasing peace, you're radiating it. You are no longer looking for signs, you've become one. Integration doesn't happen through revelation. It happens through repetition. Every pause you've practiced, every storm you've endured without losing your center, they all carve the neural pathways of embodiment. And suddenly, calm isn't something you return to. It's the atmosphere you live in. The Stoics would describe this as virtue, not as moral superiority, but as the natural expression of harmony between reason and action. When your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors form a single line, there's no inner argument left. Life becomes simple, almost quiet. You begin to understand what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one, It's not about image. It's about integration, the seamless blending of knowing and doing until they're indistinguishable. In this stage, mastery is not shown through control or philosophy. It's shown in the way you move through ordinary moments, with quiet precision, with grace, with coherence that doesn't need to announce itself. Embodiment doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with applause, with a halo, or with any visible sign. It shows up in the smallest, most ordinary decisions, the way you respond when someone interrupts you, the way you breathe before replying to anger, the way you choose patience over pride. In this stage, your philosophy has moved from your tongue into your nervous system. Your reactions, once automatic, now move through awareness first. Even under pressure, a quiet intelligence guides you, not because you force yourself to be calm, but because calm has become your nature. This is the point where coherence leaves the meditation cushion and enters the marketplace. It's easy to speak of peace when life is gentle, but real embodiment is tested in noise, in traffic, in deadlines, in conversations that challenge your ego. It's how you carry silence into sound. The Stoics practiced this every day. Epictetus told his students that philosophy wasn't about words, but about living in a way that matched one's understanding. To him, theory without embodiment was just noise, cleverness without coherence. So the question becomes, how do you walk through the world when no one is watching? Do your smallest gestures reflect the same alignment you speak about in your highest ideals? Because in this stage, truth isn't measured by what you know. It's measured by what you consistently embody. The field no longer tests you. It trusts you, and that trust shows up as flow, not as luck, but as a continuous conversation between your integrity and the intelligence of the universe. Eventually, every seeker must return to the marketplace, to the noise, the deadlines, the human messiness that never really disappears. Embodiment isn't retreating from life. It's re-entering it differently. You go back to your work, your family, your responsibilities, but this time, you bring stillness with you. The same situations that once provoked anxiety now feel neutral. The same people who used to test your patience now reveal your growth. The outer world hasn't changed. You have. And that shift changes the meaning of everything you touch. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while practicing stoicism in silence. He didn't escape chaos. He learned to remain coherent inside it. He wrote his meditations not as a philosopher hiding from the world, but as a man governing it with discipline and compassion. He understood that peace wasn't found in withdrawal. It was forged in participation. Embodiment means learning to participate fully without being possessed by the noise. You listen deeply, but you don't absorb confusion. You act decisively, but you don't hurry. You serve the world, but you no longer lose yourself in it. This balance is the mark of true mastery, not detachment, but dynamic presence. You become like the eye of a storm, surrounded by motion, yet untouched by it. And from that calm center, your influence expands quietly. People feel safe around you, not because you speak of peace, but because you radiate it. This is when wisdom begins to serve, not as a shield, but as light. When embodiment deepens, even the smallest actions become sacred. Making coffee in the morning, cleaning your space, speaking to a stranger, everything becomes a reflection of your inner order. There's no separation anymore between the spiritual and the ordinary. Presence turns the mundane into meditation. You begin to understand that the real temple is not a place. It's a moment fully inhabited. The Stoics knew this well. They didn't build shrines to worship calmness. They lived in a way that expressed it. For them, every act was an offering to reason, to virtue, to coherence. When you wash a dish with full awareness, you are not just cleaning the dish, you're cleaning the mind. When you listen without waiting to reply, you're not just hearing words, you're honoring existence. When you breathe before responding, you're not just pausing, you're choosing alignment over reaction. This is living meditation, awareness in motion. It doesn't withdraw from the world, it refines it. Because every action born from coherence carries a frequency that silently reorganizes reality. The way you move, speak, or even think becomes a quiet teaching to everyone who crosses your path. Seneca said, "Behavior, not words, persuades." Embodiment is that persuasion, effortless, invisible, continuous. You no longer need to convince anyone of what peace is. You become its demonstration, and that's when service begins naturally. You don't serve out of obligation. You serve because peace, when full, always overflows. When you reach embodiment, your influence changes form. It no longer comes through persuasion or debate. It radiates quietly through presence. You walk into a room, and people feel calmer without knowing why. You speak less, yet your words carry more gravity. You no longer need to prove truth. You simply live it, and life begins to mirror it back. This is how true teachers are born, not from titles or positions, but from frequency. They don't gather followers, they awaken equals. Their lives become a mirror reminding others of their own coherence. Even their silence becomes instruction. Marcus Aurelius never tried to convert anyone. He led by the weight of his stillness. He ruled an empire not through dominance, but through disciplined calm, through the kind of authority that doesn't shout, but commands through alignment. He knew that leadership begins with self-governance. When you embody coherence, the same happens to you in your own sphere. Your family, your colleagues, your friends, they begin to shift just by being near your steadiness. Not because you fix them, but because your stability reminds them of their own. That's the paradox of influence. It expands most when you stop trying to expand it. Service, in this stage, is no longer a duty. It's a reflex. You share peace because withholding it would feel unnatural. You teach not to gain recognition, but because truth seeks expression through you. You've become a vessel, not for perfection, but for presence. And presence, once embodied, begins to transform everything it touches, silently, consistently, endlessly. When coherence becomes embodiment, the search ends, not because you found all the answers, but because you stopped needing them. You start realizing that life itself has always been the teaching, and every experience, even the painful ones, were parts of a curriculum designed to refine your vibration. You don't separate growth from living anymore. Work becomes practice. Rest becomes prayer. Every interaction becomes feedback from the field, showing you where you still contract and where you expand. This is what the Stoics meant by freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from distortion. You are no longer dragged by emotion, nor frozen by fear. You act with precision, guided not by impulse but by inner knowing. It's not perfection, it's participation with awareness. In this stage, peace stops being a goal. It becomes the ground you stand on. The storms of life still come, but they no longer unmake you. You bend, but you do not break. You feel everything, but you are owned by nothing. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The impediment to action advances action." What stands in the way becomes the way. Embodiment is that realization lived out loud. You stop avoiding obstacles and begin walking through them with calm precision. Every difficulty becomes a doorway, every ending a refinement, every silence an instruction. And as you move through life this way, coherent, embodied, awake, you no longer ask the field for signs. You are the sign, a living proof that peace is possible. Even here, even now. Take a breath. Look at how far you've come. You began this journey searching for meaning, wondering why pain repeats, why silence lasts so long, while life seems to test the very parts of you that have already broken. But somewhere along the way, your questions began to dissolve. Not because you found new explanations, but because you found a new center. Let's revisit what's unfolded. You started with Coherent Manifestation, learning that reality isn't a wish-granting machine but a mirror. That every experience reflects your internal structure, not your intentions. You learned that alignment matters more than ambition, that peace creates precision. Then came information field access, where you stopped chasing knowledge and started receiving it. You discovered that wisdom rides in silence, not in noise. That intuition isn't fantasy, but the universe translating itself into language you can feel. You began to trust the whisper more than the shout. Next was probability navigation, the art of choosing with clarity instead of fear. You realized that every decision opens a line of reality, and coherence helps you sense which path harmonizes with your essence. You stopped demanding certainty and began trusting resonance. The world didn't become easier. It became clearer. From there, you entered Coherent Relationship Orchestration, where the field reorganized your connections. People left, others appeared, silence expanded, all by design. You learned to bless the departures and recognize new arrivals as reflections of your evolving frequency. You passed the final test of love, to release without resentment and to stay gentle while everything shifts. And finally, you arrive at integration and embodiment, the stage where truth becomes movement, where you no longer study peace but breathe it, where coherence ceases to be practice and becomes presence. Your stillness began to teach more than your words ever could. Through these 5 patterns, you've crossed what we call the final threshold. Not a gate that leads to another world, but a doorway back into this one, entered differently. Because once coherence is embodied, you stop waiting for a life to become spiritual. You realize it always was. This is the quiet revolution that Stoic philosophy pointed toward, a transformation not of circumstance, but of perception. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, they weren't chasing enlightenment in temples. They were practicing coherence in the middle of wars, politics, and human frailty. They didn't speak of escape. They spoke of mastery. And now, that same mastery lives in you. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It shows itself in your ability to stay centered while the world moves, to respond with clarity where others react with fear, to see meaning where others see randomness. If you remember nothing else from this journey, remember this: the field doesn't measure your effort. It measures your frequency. And the frequency of peace is the most powerful signal in existence. So the work is not to do more, but to be clearer. Not to fight chaos, but to stop feeding it. Not to demand control, but to embody trust. Because when coherence becomes pure, the field stops testing you and starts creating through you. And that's when life itself begins to speak in your voice. If this message has reached you, it's because you were ready to hear it. Not ready in the sense of achievement, but ready in the sense of openness. Something inside you has already begun to resonate with truth, even if you can't yet describe it in words. So before you leave this space, take a moment to sit with what moved you. Don't rush to write it down. Don't rush to share it. Just feel it. Because awareness, when felt deeply, becomes transformation. And if this conversation spoke to something real inside you, stay with this community. This space, StoicCraft, exists to keep that frequency alive. Every episode, every reflection, every pause we share here, it's part of building a culture of coherence in a world addicted to noise. Not a movement of perfection, but of presence. If you found value in this, let it ripple. Share it with someone who's in their own storm. Someone who might need a reminder that silence isn't emptiness, it's evolution. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and stay close. Because this journey doesn't end with understanding. It deepens through practice. We walk this path together, not as students or followers, but as human beings learning how to live awake. Now I'll leave you with one question. The kind that lingers after the sound fades. What would your life look like if peace was no longer something you practiced, but something you were? Sit with that, and when the answer comes, even if it whispers, that's the field speaking back.